All right, folks. The story I'm going to cover today is one that's not going to be easy to talk about, but it is one that we warned about for a long time. I went to the trouble to print out Project 2025 and actually sit down and read it and pull out a highlighter and break it down. And I would have people say to me, "Yeah, it's pretty long winded. It's pretty boring in places." And I said, "Yeah, it is. But there is some massive, giant red flags in there of things that these people want to do and visions that these people have for this country. And it's one of the most radical agendas that we've ever seen. And I think we need to highlight it." So I would bring different creators here on the channel and we would talk about certain highlighted sections of it because it was so alarming. And we got accused of being hyperbolic. We got accused of trying to spread hysteria. And then Donald Trump, all he had to do was come out and say, "I've got nothing to do with that." Well, when he said that, we showed clips here on the channel of the, authors behind Project 2025 behind closed doors. Look like something you'd see on a Godfather movie. They're behind closed doors and they're talking about how that we know Trump has to distance himself from us. We know that he can't admit that he likes us. We know we're not popular with the American people, but we just got to get him over the finish line. And when we get him over that finish line, he'll do everything we say. And we tried to point out, no, look, he does have something to do with it. Clearly, he clearly is behind it. They're saying it. They're saying that it's okay for him to bash them. So we tried really hard to bring so many of these points out and let people realize just how serious of a situation that we were up against. And then the minute Donald Trump got across the finish line, here comes Steve Bannon just laughing out loud. "Well, I guess we can say Project 2025 now. Yay." And Charlie Kirk, who's someone I heard refer to him as the youth pastor of MAGA. And now, whoever said that, I was just scrolling and seeing it. And I wish I could give him credit for it because I'll never be able to unhear it. And he will forever be the youth pastor of MAGA now. But they all just begin celebrating and saying, "Yeah, this is exactly what we intended to do." So, like I said, this next story is disturbing, but it's one that I feel like that we need to focus our attention on. And this is one of those stories that we tried so hard to warn people that, hey, these things could happen to women, and we tried our best, and so we're just going to keep bringing stories like this up so that people realizes we weren't trying to be hyperbolic. We were just trying to stand up for people and let people know what kind of radical agenda was headed our way. But this story here is from MidasNews.com, and it was written by Troy Matthews. A Georgia woman was arrested after disposing of a miscarriage. Police are treating the disposal of the fatal miscarriage as an abandonment of a dead body. So here's the story, folks. A woman in Tifton, Georgia was arrested this week after disposing of a miscarried fetus in a dumpster. Selena Maria Chandler Scott, age 24, was found unconscious and bleeding by EMS after miscarrying. Police later found the remains of her fetus in a bag in a dumpster nearby after a witness reported seeing her dispose of the bag. Scott was arrested and charged with concealing the death of another person and one count of throwing away or abandonment of a dead body. Tifton police said in a press release the fetus died as a result of a miscarriage, not an abortion. So this wasn't something that she did, folks. She was transferred to the Tift Regional Medical Center for treatment after being found and was not immediately charged. It's unclear what Scott should have done to avoid charges in this case. Her arrest is another example of the rights of a fetus taking precedence over the rights of women in red states. Vagueness in the language of Republican abortion bans has led women to avoid going to the hospital for care of miscarriages. Any intervention to save a woman's life could be interpreted as an illegal abortion, a crime which carries a sentence of up to 10 years. Scott's case is similar to that of Brittany Watts, a 34-year-old Ohio woman who was charged with the abuse of a corpse after miscarrying in her toilet at her home. A grand jury later refused to indict Watts. So that's the level of extreme that we're up against, and that is a truly tragic story. And I never thought that we would ever be at this particular point that we're in this country. I really didn't. I was naive. I really thought that the abortion issue was one that the evangelicals used. I felt like it was one that Republican politicians used to tug at the heartstrings of the evangelicals and get their vote. But I felt like that it was something. I felt like Roe versus Wade would always be around. I felt like women would always be able to get the care that they needed. And I always looked at those issues as wedge issues. I never thought that it would actually be overturned. But then we saw Donald Trump stack the Supreme Court, and we saw him do it. And I remember when it first happened and it was overturned, I thought, okay, well, this is tragic and it's going to cause a lot of suffering. It's going to cause a lot of pain, but this should keep a Republican from winning the White House again. This one issue right here should be big enough to stop it, you would think. But over time, I think a lot of people got desensitized to stuff, and they got so caught up in the culture wars that they refused to listen to people like us who was trying to put the very serious stories right in front of their faces and say, hey, consider this. We said this is what's going to happen when Roe versus Wade gets overturned. And I've covered so many stories here on the channel. We had Kate Cox out of Texas that had to leave Texas to get the care that she needed. Amber Thurman, also in Georgia, passed away because she needed a DNC and couldn't get it. Couldn't get the help she needed. She laid there and bled to death. Now this girl. It's stories we've tried to raise awareness on. It's not about being hyperbolic. Hyperbolic is when you set and get people scared to death of the trans community and scared to death that their daughter is going to have to fight one in an octagon, and then it turns out that there's 500,000 athletes in the NCAA and less than 10 of them are trans. That's hyperbolic. That's what hyperbole is. That's what hysteria is. That's what division is. We weren't trying to do any of those things. We were trying to talk about how severe this was all going to get. And I've covered the story several times on the channel and brought this point across that there was a study from the JAMA Institute that found that since Roe versus Wade was overturned, there's been 64,000 cases of women being raped. There was, and a lot of those cases was in places where that those pregnancies couldn't be, there was sorry, I'm getting tongue tied. There was no exception for rape. There was nothing. So we covered stories like that. And then we would have people say, well, it's still legal. They just kicked it back to the states. If you don't like it in your state, go to another state. Well, then we've covered stories on the channel about states saying, okay, if you go to another state, then we'll get you and we'll bring you back here and prosecute you here. And we'll prosecute the doctor over there. So now these doctors are terrified to provide care for women. And that is those are the kind of stories that people should have been focusing on. All these bro podcasters and all these networks that just sit and covered trans and sports, that sat and told people that drag queens was the problem. Drag queens was going to come after their kids, and just all this ridiculous shit they set and spread. And I never will forget, I've said this several times on the channel, I always think of this anytime I'm doing a story like this, but I was a huge fan, and still am, as far as that of pro wrestling. I've always enjoyed it. I did more so back in the 80s. Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen, Midnight Express, and Jim Cornette. That was my jam. But, I still watch it today with my kids, and I always loved The Undertaker. He was always on my Mount Rushmore of wrestlers, and he still would be as far as the character of The Undertaker. Well, he has Trump on his podcast, and that was disappointing, but it's like, hey, okay, that's what he thinks. I can, still respect his art or his craft or whatever. He's got him on there, and he sat there and just normalized and same-washed this insane person. But there was this one part in that podcast I'll never forget. It's where he said, sir, I have a question about my daughter, because you met her yesterday, and there's a question I want to talk to you about, you protecting her. And I thought, well, wait a minute, maybe this guy could redeem himself by asking about Roe versus Wade. Maybe he could redeem himself by asking about, what if my daughter's bleeding out in a hospital bed? Will she be able to get the care she needs? I'm not sure where he lives these days, but he's from Texas. So I'm like, that's what I thought. I was like, he could redeem himself right here with me if he would at least ask that question. But he said, what are you going to do to protect her from trans and sports? And I just face palmed. Like, dude, what a golden opportunity that you blew. And the chances of your daughter facing a trans person in a volleyball match is slim to none compared to the cases we've covered here on the channel of women who were left to die because they didn't get the care they needed. The fact that men got so worked up in these kind of culture wars and divisive subjects just shows their bigotry. It shows that their bigotry and the stuff that they feared and the stuff they thought was weird outweighed their actual care for their own daughters. And they really put their trust in people like Trump. they're still sitting over there going, that dude's being hyperbolic. Trump wouldn't do that, man. That ain't what I voted for. All those classic stupid lines that I'm so tired of hearing. I'm so tired of hearing people say that shit. I'm so tired of hearing people say it because we sit here and we watch and we pay attention every damn day. And we cover the tough stories, the ones that's painful to read. But that's the ones that they want to sweep under the rug. Well, don't talk about that. Let me get on here and flex and talk about what a macho man I am as I, put down this trans person, as I refuse to use their pronouns. Watch me flex and do that, I have no respect for men like that whatsoever. None. There will never be any for me on that. So we're going to continue to cover these kind of stories here on the channel because I feel like they're important and I feel like people needs to hear them. And I know sometimes they're painful to hear and hard to hear. But we weren't trying to be hyperbolic. We were trying to talk about the issues at hand. And we were trying to talk about just how bad things could get. And now we're there. So I don't know if we'll ever be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube, but all I know is that we have to continue to highlight these stories and raise awareness and let people realize what's going on. And as bad as I hate to say it, maybe if it hits enough guys and they have to suffer with their daughters, maybe they'll turn around. I don't have a lick of faith in them, though. I'm not trying to be a pessimist or bring down the room. There's really no way to wrap up this video on a positive note. I'll just say that. But I would hope that one day some of these people would start to wake up to just how severe this situation truly is.